Hello and welcome. My name is Blad Sims and I'm an Associate Director with LCN Legal. As you may already know, we focus on creating substance for transfer pricing compliance, particularly in the context of intercompany agreements. I'm really pleased to be here today with our guest speaker, Richard Magran-Wells of Adjoint. Richard, many thanks for giving us your time today. Richard is going to, oh, you're welcome. Richard is going to speak on the subject of distributed ledger technology and how this will change the way that we document transactions in the future. So Richard, I'll hand over to you.
Perfect, thank you, Lisa. As Lisa mentioned, I'm Richard Magran-Wells with Adjoint Technology. Adjoint was started 3 years ago. We are as she mentioned, a distributed ledger company. We're going to talk about what exactly that means and what it can do for you. My background is I was a banker for over 35 years and a lawyer along the way. But my focus in the last few years has been on financial regulation and new technology and how that's impacting the world of finance. So today we're going to talk about how distributed ledger technology is changing the way we document transactions. That sounds like a misnomer. The whole idea of ledgers and transactions, ledgers and documents, sounds a little awkward, but it's actually very powerful. The idea of distributed ledgers and decentralized databases are a new concept when it comes to dealing with documentation and language. We think of it as dealing with numbers and spreadsheets, but here's what we're seeing is technology for enabling shared databases, multiple writers, which support multiple writers, creates embedded trust models and form one unified transaction log. Now, we hear the words distributed ledger technology and we all think blockchain, but it's more than that. Blockchain is a subset of distributed ledger technology. And that's always the first question people ask. Aren't we talking just blockchain? But distributed ledger technology.
That's the question I was actually going to ask, Richard. I completely think that. So yeah, brilliant if you can explain to me why it isn't exactly the same thing.
Sorry, didn't mean to hit on the question there. The whole idea though is that people think blockchain and they think Bitcoin and they think all these crazy things, but the reality is that we're already seeing distributed ledger technology being utilized throughout industry. We're going to talk about some of the sectors and where it's being used, but what's important to understand is that these four factors, the fact that you've got distributed databases, you've got multiple writers who can access, it creates this immutable single source of truth. Blockchain, the only difference, to answer your question, Lisa, the difference with blockchain is that you're locking down sectors of data, whether it's 10 minutes of data or X bytes of data, you are locking that down so it can never be changed and altered. Sometimes you require a consensus to do that. Sometimes you require other factors. But once you've met that requirement, you lock down into a block a certain amount of data, and that cannot be altered.
Right.
Distributed ledger technology is really about a shared decentralized database that can be accessed and controlled and becomes very, very usable. But blockchain is a segment of that distributed ledger technology. So,
understood. Thank you.
I hope that answers the question.
It does, yes.
We won't be going into, if you have time, I would recommend that you look into things like the Byzantine general logic problem. Because the problem with the internet has been, quite honestly, you can't trust anything that travels over the internet. As we've seen from things that you find on Facebook and memes, you can't trust what you see on the internet. If you have time, look up the Byzantine general, because it's all about how you deal with the logic problem of understanding data and trusting data when it comes from an outside source. Okay. there was a famous, the most famous cartoon the New Yorker magazine ever ran was in 1993. And it's the famous one of a little dog sitting at a computer. And the quote is, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And the truth is that you can't trust what you see and what you hear unless there's some way to validate that data. And that's what we're going to talk about. So why bother with going through all this extra work to create decentralized databases like this kind of DLT? Why bother with it? Well, we've created this little drop-down waterfall here. So do you need a shared consistent source of data? For most things that you're doing around an office, for things of who's going to bring cake to next weekend's event, your email and your spreadsheets are fine. What we're finding, though, is that companies are using email and spreadsheets that are vulnerable to hacking, that are vulnerable to error in important ways that they should not be utilized for. What we're seeing is that people are recording transactions and sharing documents via email, spreadsheets, PDFs, and that's wrong. You need a consistent source of data. Is more than one party going to need that update? Well, if that's the case, a regular database could work if you're all seeing the same database and you can update it. Think of Google Docs or any of the file sharing programs that allow you to work together. Those are fine for a lot of normal transactions. But does the data, once written, need to be permanent? Now you're talking about something where you need a permanent record of what you're working on. And this is where it gets tricky. And we talk about tamper-proof log after that. Well, now there are write-only servers, for example, that allow you to record on a server only once. Well, that can be impractical in the sense that you're really utilizing that hardware as your written in stone kind of tablet. Well, that's not a very practical long-term use for that kind of hardware. So what our technology provides, what DLT provides, is transparency, security, traceability, speed, and cost efficiency. What you're doing is finding a way to validate data and write it in an immutable way. Once you have that, you can start to do some really interesting things over the internet. Things you couldn't do before. So, why all this matters? I used to have gray hair, now I have very little hair, but the reality is that I remember back in the day, this is the part where I rant about the old days, but I remember back in the days, back in the 80s, it was 1983 when they were introducing Lotus 123. And yeah. For those of us who can remember back before then, you really were talking about basic stupid programs and manual operations to do calculations, or very customized written programs that were being used by banks and others to do calculations. Spreadsheets change the way we calculate and do finance and do math in the modern world. Yeah. Fundamentally. Mm-hmm. I was working at Citibank in 1985, and Citibank had an internal program called Citi Mail. It actually put Citibank ahead of many of our competitors because we could send overnight messages to our colleagues overseas. Yeah. And get immediate responses back because we had this internal email. It was quite the concept.
It's amazing. It's not that long ago either.
It's not that long ago. And people forget. I mean, it's easy to forget. I had one of the first Palm Pilots that allowed people to communicate and send email on the go. But yeah. The reason I mention that is email and the way we do email now has changed the way we communicate with each other. And so So while spreadsheets change the way we do math, email changed the way we communicate. DLT and blockchains is going to change the way we share data across the internet, and it's not going to be a decade from now. It's going to be the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. All of this will be taking place.
Amazing.
So, enough theory. Let's talk about what we're really seeing and what people are actually talking about in the markets. I put this up here for a couple reasons. You can see the 2016 versus 2018. You see the differences that people were talking about using DLT to reduce cost of capital, reduce risk. But all along, they've been talking about reducing operational costs. And that's still the case. And people are recognizing that's the short-term place where this is really going to make a difference. On the potential use side, initially people were talking about tracking supply chain and gold and all of that. And that is still the case. We're looking at all kinds of interesting things where we're tracking all kinds of things. But the reality is that where we're seeing DLT being implemented now, and we'll talk about a case, we're rolling out a use case by the end of this year. We're talking about trade finance and payments and syndicated loans. I spent 5 years at Citibank working in syndicated loans, and back then it was emails and it was shared documents across the internet, which now would be ridiculous and a compliance risk across the board. But that's where this is going to change things. People are looking at payments, people are looking, and we have a payment use case, we'll talk a little bit about that. But in trade finance, where you've seen bills of lading, we've seen bankers' acceptances, the same process used for basically almost 300 years, and trade finance has changed very little. And I'm sure at LCN you guys have looked at some of that in standardized documents, but trade finance is a backwards area of finance and always has been. Syndicated loans, when you talk about, we closed one transaction in my day where we had 21 banks sitting around a table signing with wet signatures, coming together to sign.
Yes, very old school completions where everyone is all around doing it all together. Yes, I do remember all that. And I think so in terms of industry, is there a particular industry where you see DLT being something that really gains traction, or is it industry wide? Do you think this is going to have application to every single type of company?
I think it will have impact for every type of company. I think we've seen some, the banks obviously have jumped in with both feet and are looking for all kinds of use cases. We're starting to see insurance industry play in this space as well, because some of their systems have been so backward for so long. But I think the other area where you're seeing pretty quick adoption is logistics. So people that are tracking shipments and things like that, you're starting to see it. And then again, trade finance. So there you're starting to see the immediate impacts. Maersk Shipping rolled out one of the first blockchain uses in insurance about almost 3 years ago now. And because their name is Maersk and they control 30% of shipping in the world, they were able to push all the other parties involved into committing to partake in the blockchain. So
it's very interesting.
Okay. I do want to talk a little bit about, before we jump ahead here, about where we see the next use cases coming. We talk about trucking, we talk about logistics, we talk about banking, but I do see that we're going to see connections of systems. One of the things that we see, and one of the things our company Adjoin is working on, is connecting systems. So we're going to talk about using DLT for documentation, but that documentation leads to the actual movement of funds. That can be a separate DLT, but those systems can connect. And so that's where I think you're going to see really interesting things happening. And we're going to talk a little bit about how those connect. So
Perfect.
We call it networked ecosystems. But basically what we're talking about is obviously distributed ledger technology, but that's only a piece of it. What you're really seeing where the real power, the real dynamic movement comes from is the combination of things that are happening right now. If this had all happened 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had the ability to talk about smart contracts, or more particularly application programming interfaces. Smart contracts, as a lawyer, it pains me to use the term smart contracts because it really is not a smart contract. And I'm sure, Lisa, I'm sure you bump into this as well. People are very confused when they hear smart contracts. But the reality is it's an automated business process. It's a self-executing program. If you think about Excel, Excel has little macros that you can plug into your Excel spreadsheet. It's similar to that in the sense that it is a little piece of code that is written that is self-executing. If this happens, then this automatically happens next. When you combine that, the reason this was not as powerful until now was that you couldn't trust the data that you were pulling, particularly over the internet. You couldn't trust the data you were receiving until you had gone back and validated and manually confirmed it. Now with the distributed ledger, you can trust the data. Once you trust the data, you can use the smart contract. The application programming interfaces, we talk about open banking in the UK. We're just starting to see more and more of that here in the US. But I think I think you're just starting to see more and more of the application programming interfaces being implemented here in the US, where banks are starting to open their systems and allow outside providers like Adjoint and others to access that data. After all, it's your data. It's you, the customer's data. So whether you're talking about a bank or an insurance company or others, if you're allowed to pull data from another's system and connect it through an API, that creates a really interesting dynamic where you have distributed ledgers that can store all that data, smart contracts that can use that data, and application programming that can pull the next set of data, making it a connect ecosystem. That becomes really, really powerful, and we're going to show you how. So for our case study, we're going to talk about a real world case, one that we have built out and one that's in the works as we speak. But we're talking about a company that that was looking at their intercompany loan process. We actually went to them to talk about treasury products and other products, and they said, that's not our problem. Our problem is the intercompany loan process, which we control, but it's touched by 8 different parties along the way. All of that takes way too long. We've got the draft process, we've got the final review, and then region-specific review. They said, we want to be able to create, edit, and approve loans, and it's all got to be visible on a single portal. That hadn't been done before, and what we're seeing now is that we've got a company that had a very, very messy process using Word documents, using PDFs, and spreadsheets to do all the calculations. And they figured that their time would take normal time for approving an internal loan would take anywhere from 10 days to 6 weeks, depending on whether the person in tax was on vacation or not.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're starting to see now that by using our system, by sending alerts and things like that, you can move this process. Our goal is to get timing down to 7 days and hopefully even better.
Perfect.
So here's an example that we created for this company to show this is what a standard intercompany workflow looks like. And what's important to note is that some of these require the input of data. So the green ones require input of data, that you're pooling data from somewhere, whether it's interest rates or FX. And some of them require manual review. Some of them require signing off. But you can see we've got 6 different parties.
Yeah.
And this is a standard process. And I'm sure, Lisa, from LCN's point of view.
Yes. Yeah, we see this a lot. Particularly, yeah, in the context of intercompany agreements, particularly when you have to have a number of stakeholders involved and you need to get several clearances before you can move things forward. Yes, we do see similar situations.
And Lisa, tell me this. I think you probably see this as well. We created this, but in talking to other companies, they have very different processes. I'm sure you come across companies that do this completely differently from this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think the thing to recognize is that we needed to create a solution that was going to give us a permanent immutable record, so that we could have it, so we could create smart contracts that automate the workflow where possible, and connect it to systems that would allow us to pull in interest rates, pull in foreign exchange, pull in data from withholding tax data from other sources. Yeah. It was a tall order. Mm-hmm. But what we have found is that by creating a single trustworthy view, auditable, automated, flexible workflows, we're going to create something really new. We're going to create a data pool to mine. We're going to have, once we've created all this and once it's all accessible on this database that we've built, we can then mine that data and use it. But the real value of the ecosystem in my mind is it starts to connect into the finance system and give us real-time settlement. I mean, you're doing the intercompany loan for a reason. If we can cut the time it takes to arrange finance from 6 weeks down to 1 week, the money saved in those 5 weeks in finance is substantial.
Sure.
If we can move the money, sorry?
No, I was going to say, I can see how this would apply brilliantly in situations such as cash pooling, or similar kind of, or the financial ones, obviously, yeah. But the cash pooling, it's quite interesting to see how real-time settlement is really important in that space. So I can see how that would be very applicable in that area. Yeah.
Yeah, by connecting into the systems, and we can talk a little bit more about that another time. But our treasury allows us to do real-time internal payments and settlements between a company. And we're working on, we have built something for Credit Suisse, but that will be the subject of a different webinar.
Yeah, they will do that.
So what we're building out behind the numbers, behind all the database, is of course the loan agreement. Now, we at Adjoint don't do legal documentation. We leave that to our good friends at LCN and others. But we've created this sample intercompany loan agreement. And the point is that our system will allow, the whole point of a distributed ledger will allow you to pull data in, and we can cut and paste it, put it into the system, and create this. And then we use insert tag. And so what we've done is we allow people to put these little blue boxes in the place of effective date, borrower name, loan limits, interest rates. And then it goes back into the system, back into the database, looking for that part of the database or spreadsheet, pulling in real-time data that has been created for this transaction. And again, what's important is there's only one version of this document ever. It's not a PDF, it's not version 1.0, it is the document. And so anyone who logs onto the portal, what they're seeing is what is there. And importantly, there is a record of who changed it and who accessed the system.
Yes, that was the question I was going to ask. So in terms of previous changes and how that's been managed, you constantly have a vision of that if you need it.
Yeah, and always having that information, obviously, you hate to think the worst, but of course there's always the issue of discovery down the road if there's a problem.
Yeah.
And so we have this incredible system. I remember one of the large settlements here in the US was with Morgan Stanley years ago, who was unable to produce documents that showed the progression of a transaction. They were unable to pull records. They just simply couldn't find them. And the fine, I believe, was well into the tens of millions, the resulting fine. But now what we're talking about is a system that is, and because it's a distributed ledger, because this record is stored at every access point of the portal, if you should have a system crash, if you should have a flood, a hurricane, a whatever, tornado that destroys your servers, and if it's not stored on a cloud somewhere that's protected, if it's accessible through another server at another point in your portal, you can recreate that entire database. Okay?
That's marvelous, yeah.
So it's encrypted, but it's there. Now, what's important to note too is that you can control access to, for example, for the system that we've built, a subsidiary can only borrow and only see documents that relate to their entity. They can't see all the loans. They can't see, all of the stuff going on. They can't see all the rates. They can only see those that they have permission to see. So, right?
The confidentiality is maintained in that way as well. Then that's
So what's interesting is, although they only have access to see their piece of the record is all there. It's just encrypted.
Yeah.
So if we need to recreate it at a later point, we can. So using that, and as you can see in the top right there, this is for Caterpillar that we built this system. We've created a single trustworthy view, yes, and it also shows, we built it out so that it shows the numbers, it shows the system, what the total amount of loans for any single entity is, what rate, all of that information is available. So again, not related directly to the documentation, they can connect it to their financial systems as well.
Yeah.
But let's talk about flexible workflows, because quite honestly, this whole process wasn't going to work unless we could achieve something that was pretty new. And what I think is going to be a next step, and that people need to be aware of in the business of law and in creating transactions like this, what's some of the new, and I am not a technologist, so I will leave that to the people that do coding and whatnot, but some of the newer languages like Haskell and things that we use are what they call no-code or low-code type of programming that allow people that are creating transactions to create flexible workflows. And so what we've done here and what you're seeing is someone who's gone through and step by step built out with drop-down boxes and very intuitive, simple processes, created a workflow that says request loan, internal funding, all of these step-by-steps, all the way through to start the loan and then repay the loan. What's interesting is then this can be used again and again and again and again. So if every month you're doing a regular loan that has to take place every month, it can go through this process. For another workflow, you may do something very different, and it may only have 6 steps. And you can create that and title it something different and keep it in your system. And then when that type of loan is required, you pull that loan up. So it becomes really powerful that you don't have to go back and ask your ERP or treasury management provider to create some new software. you can do it yourself. The administrator can just go through and set this up and say, Bob can sign for this, Joe can sign for this, legal review can sign off now, we can upload the agreement, and here. So suddenly your company can create this type of system. Now, this is where companies like LCN will obviously be very useful to come in and review and help draft up what this process could and should look like to be in compliance and what's required to get there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well that was your advertisement for the day, Lisa.
I didn't make the best of it, but yes, you're absolutely right. Without doing a hard sell, but yes, it does. It works seamlessly with what we do. Yeah.
But it is very true that what we're seeing is, especially for intercompany lending, there's been at least in the U.S. it's been a very ad hoc, messy kind of process.
Agreed.
And and I think this kind of thing not only sets the standard, it also sets this permanent record that you can go back and track and you can find, and whether there's not just discovery, but just having a better record of what's there and what you can see, and making sure that you're in compliance at all times.
It's the formulaic nature of it, so you can ensure that the steps that you need to take, that everyone has to follow, are compliant steps, and the end result will mean that everything you have structured is compliant. And that's the very useful side from our perspective, is that you can ensure that everyone is always on the same page, following the set processes, and the end result is then always compliant.
Right, exactly. And I think we haven't talked about one of the steps here we've got on this particular one is set withholding tax. But the whole idea of finding a source of where you pull your tax information and your requirements from, and whether you're pulling that through API or whatever, that can have a powerful impact when you're looking at presenting a record to government authorities and others saying, this is where we got the information. This is the day we pulled this, this tax rate. It was valid as of that date, right?
Yeah. And it's something that we also encourage our clients to incorporate into their corporate resolutions. So when they're making decisions about whether their company ought to enter into an ICA, whether it's the best process for the company, best step for the company, also have as part of that board resolution or written resolution reference to the evidence on which they've based that decision. And this relates to what you're saying here. So how they've reached their rates, why they've agreed that is an appropriate interest rate to set for an intercompany loan, for example. All of that background data is very much part of what supports the corporate governance process.
Right. Exactly. Well, all of this is, anyone who's ever had to deal with multiple transactions going on at once will appreciate that we created data warehouse. And so all of these transactions will be stored in this data warehouse, sortable and visible. You have a filter up there you can go through and sort it by volume, by tenor. And so, but as we say, data pool to mine. Over a couple of years, you're going to suddenly see, oh, this subsidiary is borrowing this rate and this long, and why don't we redo their financing so that they're not coming in and borrowing for this date to this level.
And this is really interesting to me. Something we see quite a lot, again, sort of going back to cash pooling situations, is obviously a cash pool is meant to be a short-term process. And sometimes what happens with clients, they don't realize quite how long a company has been borrowing underneath the cash pool, and the rate that's being applied to that. So there's a big difference between short-term lending rates and long-term lending rates to ensure that they're on an arm's length basis. So this sort of data pool is really interesting, because then you can look back retrospectively and say, well, hold on, they've had this amount of sums for this period of time at this rate. Does that now effectively mean the terms of their loan should be different because they're a long-term borrower rather than a short-term borrower? So this sort of thing is really important to allow MNEs to keep on top of what they're doing internally and how those processes are being managed.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you sit a business analyst down with this kind of data and say, over the last 3 years, is there a better way to have done this financing? You can do the regression analysis and get there.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Perfect. Now, real-time settlement. So the point is that I won't go into our whole treasury management system. The reason I show this link is that once that loan document is finished, and once that final button is clicked that says the loan is good to go, it's authorized, we sign off, this can connect into, via API, into their bank system and actually move the funds and have the record of connecting the actual loan document to the actual flow of funds and show the payment.
Incredibly clever.
Yeah. And so our system has little links like this where you can click on the box and pull down all the information about that transaction, all the details. But like I said, that's another webinar. So why does it all matter? So why are we here today talking about how this is going to change things and the future and what does it mean? The point is that the way we share documents and the way we share data across the internet, whether it's numbers and whether it's an Excel spreadsheet and whether it's the calculations or whether it's the actual documentation, the actual agreement itself can be stored as part of an immutable log. People have not been thinking that way. It doesn't, when you say ledger, people think numbers, but start thinking documents, because that's what we're starting to see. And the fact that we can build out a flexible workflow that allows you to create this process and then change it when you need it, and create multiple workflows all within the same system and stored in that same database, that becomes really valuable. We're not talking years from now. Our system is up and live in the first quarter. And we're not talking small little companies trying this. We're talking, I have a presentation this afternoon to one of the world's largest companies. But we've already built this out for a Fortune 500, and we see more on the way. So this is a technology, a time, a true technology that's being delivered now. Its time has come. And if you're not using this process, 3 years from now, you will already be behind the times.
Incredible. Thank you. That's been a hugely interesting and informative presentation. Absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure all of our listeners will agree. If any of our listeners do have any questions about the content of our discussion today, please feel free to contact me or Richard. I'm sure you'll be happy to take any of those calls, Richard.
Definitely.
And all our details are found within the slides that accompany this webinar. So please do get in touch. Richard, thank you again. Absolutely marvelous. Thank you.
Thank you.